I know from my own experience that a cancer diagnosis can feel overwhelming. Yet, I also know that early detection is the key that can transform treatment journeys, giving invaluable time to medical teams and to their patients the precious gift of hope. These are gifts we can all help deliver.
Behind Buckingham Palace's walls, a bombshell discovery has just shattered King Charles. A hidden clause in Queen Elizabeth's will about Prince Harry has been unsealed after 3 years of secrecy. What she left behind is absolutely shocking. The inheritance terms are so explosive, so carefully hidden, that even Charles was blindsided. This single document could either save the royal family or destroy it completely.
Within the family as such, there's the spare and the heir. My brother being the heir and me being the spare. And so I think it was just a really good opportunity to choose a title that had been somewhat used against me for a long part of my life and own that title.
The morning of November the 23rd, 2025 started as an ordinary day within the private offices of Buckingham Palace. King Charles sat at the mahogany desk that had once belonged to his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the accumulated history of the British monarchy. The room itself carried the weight of tradition, with portraits of past monarchs looking down from the walls and the faint scent of old paper and furniture polish that seems to permeate every corner of royal residences. What would unfold over the next few hours would send ripples through the House of Windsor that nobody could have anticipated. Charles had requested a comprehensive review of his mother's estate documents. More than 3 years had passed since Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022 at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, and certain legal formalities required periodic attention. The King's senior legal counsel had assembled what they believed would be a routine briefing session. Accompanying the legal team were the keeper of the Privy Purse and 2 other trusted advisors who had served the royal household for decades. They carried with them a leather portfolio containing documents that appeared to detail the standard distribution of assets, properties, and heirlooms. The king, dressed in his customary dark suit with reading glasses perched on his nose, prepared himself for what he assumed would be tedious but necessary administrative work. Royal estates are complex entities, involving not just personal property but also holdings that blur the line between private and public ownership. Balmoral Castle and Sandringham House, for instance, are private properties that have been in the royal family for generations. The late Queen's jewellery collection alone consists of hundreds of pieces, each with its own provenance and designated inheritor. All of these items required documentation and proper legal processing. As the meeting progressed, Charles reviewed page after page of familiar information. The main provisions of the will had been executed according to protocol. Everything seemed to be exactly as he had understood it to be. Balmoral had been transferred as expected. Sandringham was allocated properly. The private jewellery collection had been distributed among family members according to long-standing plans. Charles had seen versions of these documents before, or at least he thought he had. There appeared to be nothing unusual or unexpected in the proceedings. Then one of the legal advisors produced an additional sealed envelope. The seal was distinctive, bearing the Queen's personal insignia, and the envelope itself showed signs of age despite having been carefully preserved. According to the advisor, this document had been filed separately with specific instructions that it should remain sealed until a comprehensive estate review was conducted more than 3 years after the Queen's death. The timing was precise and deliberate. Elizabeth had wanted a significant period to pass before this particular item came to light. Charles's hands, weathered but steady from years of public duties and private responsibilities, broke the seal carefully. The paper inside was immediately recognizable. It was in his mother's own handwriting, the distinctive script that he had seen on countless personal notes and letters throughout his life. But this was not the flowing penmanship of her younger years, when her hand had been confident and strong. This was the writing of her final months, slightly shakier but no less deliberate. Each word had been formed with care and intention. The date at the top of the document read March the 15th, 2022, placing it just 6 months before her death. Charles began to read, and his breath caught in his throat. The room, which had been filled with the quiet murmur of administrative discussion, fell into absolute silence. His advisors watched as their king's expression shifted from mild curiosity to genuine surprise, and then to something far more complex. A mixture of emotions played across features that had been trained since childhood to remain composed in public settings. But this was not a public moment. This was profoundly private. This was a son reading his mother's final thoughts about his other son, the one who had left the royal family, the one whose absence had created a wound that refused to heal. The document contained a clause that was both meticulously detailed and legally binding. It addressed Prince Harry's inheritance in ways that contradicted everything Charles had understood about his mother's final wishes. Or perhaps more accurately, it revealed wishes she had deliberately kept hidden until precisely this moment. Even in death, Queen Elizabeth was still thinking several moves ahead, still attempting to protect her family in ways they might not fully understand until the proper time arrived. Charles read the passage once, then twice, then a third time. His legal counsel, sensing the gravity of the moment, waited in respectful silence. When Charles finally looked up, they confirmed what he already suspected. The document was authentic, properly witnessed according to legal requirements, and fully enforceable under British law. There was no question about its validity. The seal had been unbroken. The signatures of witnesses were present and verified. The Queen's intentions were crystal clear. The only questions now were what to do with this information and how to proceed. The clause did not simply leave Harry a sum of money or a piece of property. It contained conditions and stipulations, a carefully constructed framework that would require decisions, conversations, and potentially a complete reassessment of the current state of affairs between the king and his younger son. This was not a simple request that could be processed through normal channels and forgotten. One of the advisors cleared his throat gently, breaking the silence that had settled over the room like a heavy blanket. They needed to understand His Majesty's wishes on how to proceed. Did he want time to consider this privately before making any decisions? Should they begin preparing briefing documents for the relevant parties who would need to be informed? Should legal opinions be sought on various aspects of implementation? The questions hung in the air, practical and necessary, but Charles remained focused on his mother's words, written in her final months, as she must have known her time was growing short. The late Queen had been known throughout her reign for her ability to think strategically, to consider not just the immediate consequences of decisions, but their long-term implications for the monarchy and the family. She had navigated the abdication crisis before she even became queen, watching her uncle give up the throne for love. She had managed the transition from empire to commonwealth, maintaining relationships with dozens of nations as they gained independence. She had weathered divorces, scandals, and the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, always with an eye toward preserving the institution while acknowledging human realities. Charles set the document down carefully on the desk and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose in a gesture of profound weariness. He thought of his mother in her study at Windsor Castle, composing these words in secret, telling no one about her plans, sealing them away with precise instructions about when they should be revealed. Had she imagined this exact scene? Her eldest son, now king, discovering her hidden wishes and having to decide whether to honor them. Of course she had. Elizabeth had always thought everything through with meticulous care. The weight of the crown, which Charles had literally worn during his coronation the previous year, suddenly felt heavier than usual. He had inherited his mother's throne, her responsibilities, and her burdens. He had prepared for this role his entire life, longer than any heir in British history. But he had not anticipated inheriting her unsolved family crisis, wrapped in legal provisions that seemed designed to force his hand in a particular direction. Yet that was precisely what sat before him now. Not just a document, but a choice. Or perhaps more accurately, a test. Would he honor his mother's clearly stated wishes, even if they complicated his own plans and preferences? Or would he find a way, as monarchs sometimes must, to interpret duty in a manner that served present needs rather than past requests? His advisors continued to wait patiently. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like minutes. Outside the palace walls, London continued its daily rhythm. Tourists gathered at the gates for the changing of the guard. Traffic moved through the streets. People went about their lives completely unaware that inside these historic walls, a discovery had just been made that could alter the course of the royal family for generations to come. King Charles knew, sitting there in that moment, that whatever he decided, there would be no going back. His mother's hidden clause was hidden, no longer. The seal had been broken, the words had been read, and now everyone involved would have to deal with the consequences of what Queen Elizabeth had set in motion from beyond the grave. The document that Queen Elizabeth had carefully prepared in her final months specified an inheritance for Prince Harry that was both substantial in financial terms and complex in its conditions. The provision revealed a level of careful consideration that demonstrated just how seriously the late Queen had thought about her grandson's future and the future of the monarchy itself. According to the terms laid out in her handwriting, she had set aside approximately £20 million from her private estate specifically for Harry. However, this was not a simple gift that could be collected and spent freely. The money came wrapped in requirements that showed the Queen's strategic thinking about family relationships and royal responsibilities. The first condition was explicit and detailed. Harry would receive full access to his inheritance only upon agreeing to maintain certain connections to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. The Queen's language in the document was precise, likely drafted with input from her most trusted legal minds, but clearly reflecting her own wishes and voice. She required that Harry spend no fewer than 90 days per year on British soil or in Commonwealth nations, engaged in work that supported either charitable causes or initiatives that benefited communities across the realm. This was a significant requirement, representing roughly a quarter of the year. Importantly, this was not a demand that Harry return to working royal duties in any official capacity. Queen Elizabeth had been too pragmatic and realistic for that kind of requirement. She understood that the break between Harry and the institution had been profound, and that forcing him back into a role he had explicitly rejected would be counterproductive. But it was a requirement that he remain meaningfully connected to the world she had spent 70 years serving. The distinction was subtle but important. She was not asking him to represent the monarchy officially, but she was asking him to maintain ties to the places and causes that the monarchy traditionally supports. The second major provision in the document addressed Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet. A portion of the inheritance, approximately £5 million, was designated specifically for their education and upbringing. However, this money also came with stipulations that would affect how it could be used and who would have oversight of it. The funds were to be managed by trustees who would need approval from both Harry and the reigning monarch, which meant King Charles would have some level of involvement in decisions about his grandchildren's future. More significantly, Queen Elizabeth had specified that the children should spend meaningful time in the United Kingdom as they grew older. The stated purpose was clear in her writing. She wanted to ensure their connection to their heritage and their family remained intact. She had written that her great-grandchildren should not become strangers to the land of their ancestors. This provision touched on one of the more sensitive aspects of Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. The couple had been protective of their children's privacy and had raised them primarily in California, away from the intense scrutiny of the British press and public. Perhaps the most revealing element of the entire package was a personal letter that Queen Elizabeth had attached to the legal document. Written in her own hand, it was addressed directly to Charles and intended to be read at the moment when the clause was discovered. In this letter, she stepped away from legal language and spoke as a mother to her son about another son. She acknowledged the difficulty of the situation with Harry in terms that were both honest and compassionate. She wrote that she understood the anger that many in the family felt, the sense of hurt and betrayal that had followed Harry's public criticisms and his decision to step away from royal duties. But the letter also contained something that cut to the heart of a mother's and grandmother's perspective, something that transcended institutional concerns and royal protocols. She stated plainly that Harry was still her grandson, that his children were still her great-grandchildren, and that she could not leave this earth without trying one more time to ensure they would not be lost to the family completely. The language reportedly conveyed both sadness about the current state of affairs and determination to create at least the possibility of future reconciliation. The letter to Charles contained what was phrased as a request rather than a command, reflecting the complex relationship between a mother and her adult son who was also destined to be king. She asked him to consider that bridges once burned can sometimes be rebuilt, but only if both sides are willing to supply the materials needed for reconstruction. Her inheritance clause, she explained, was her attempt to supply those materials. What Charles and Harry chose to build with them, if anything, would be entirely up to them. but she wanted to ensure they would have the resources, both financial and emotional, to at least make the attempt if they chose to do so. The legal team that had helped Queen Elizabeth draft these documents confirmed that the clause was essentially ironclad from a legal standpoint. The Queen had consulted with her most trusted legal advisors in preparing it, people who had served the royal household for decades and understood both the intricacies of estate law and the unique circumstances of royal family dynamics. Every word had been carefully chosen to withstand potential legal challenges and to make her intentions as clear as possible. This was not a vague suggestion that could be easily dismissed or creatively reinterpreted to mean something else. This was the formal will of a queen, and beyond that, the deeply felt will of a mother and grandmother who had run out of time to fix things herself but refused to give up trying, even knowing she would not be alive to see the results. The amount of money involved, while substantial by any normal standard, was not overwhelming by royal standards or in the context of the overall estate. Elizabeth had been shrewd enough to understand that too large a sum might create its own set of problems. It might make Harry appear to be bought, or it might fuel media narratives about special treatment and favouritism that would cause resentment among other family members. £20 million was enough to provide genuine financial security and create opportunities, but not so much that it would overshadow the deeper purpose of the provision, which was never really about money at all. The true intent behind the inheritance clause was about connection, about family bonds, about ensuring that the relationships between generations would not break completely and irreparably. The money was simply the mechanism, the tangible element that would require legal processes and ongoing communication between the parties involved. Queen Elizabeth understood that you cannot force people to love each other or even to like each other, but you can create circumstances that encourage interaction and provide incentives for maintaining ties. Reading through the document and the accompanying letter, Charles could almost hear his mother's voice in the phrasing. The combination of practical concerns and emotional appeals was characteristic of how she had approached difficult family matters throughout her reign. She had always been both head and heart, capable of making hard decisions for the good of the institution while never losing sight of the human beings involved. The language was firm yet hopeful, establishing clear boundaries and expectations while leaving room for human choice and dignity. She had known she was dying when she wrote these words. Her health had been declining throughout 2022, and by March of that year, she would have understood that her time was limited. She had known that the situation with Harry would become Charles's problem to solve, or at least to manage, once she was gone. She could no longer mediate or offer guidance in person. She could no longer make phone calls to her grandson or send private messages that might soften the edges of public disputes. Her influence would end with her life, unless she found a way to extend it beyond death. And so she had left him this. A tool, perhaps, or a burden, or maybe both at once, a hidden clause in her will that was really a hidden plea, carefully disguised in legal language, but unmistakably emotional at its core. It was a final attempt to keep her family whole, even as she prepared to leave it behind forever. The provision revealed a woman who loved deeply, who felt the fracturing of her family as a personal failure, and who refused to accept that failure as permanent or irreversible. The Queen had seen so much in her extraordinarily long life and reign. She had witnessed the aftermath of a world war, the dissolution of an empire, the transformation of society through technology and social change. She had weathered personal tragedies and public scandals. Through it all, she had maintained her commitment to duty and to family as intertwined values that could not be separated. Her final message to Charles through this inheritance clause embodied that lifelong conviction. She was asking him to remember that royal duty includes family duty, and that sometimes the hardest work of a monarch is not the public appearances or the ceremonial functions, but the private effort to hold together the people you love when forces are pulling them apart. Sitting in his private office with the documents still in his hands, King Charles faced a dilemma that was simultaneously profoundly personal and deeply institutional. The personal dimension was immediately obvious to anyone who understood the situation. This was his mother's dying wish regarding his son, the child he had loved and worried about throughout his life, but also the son who had angered and disappointed him in recent years. The pain of that complicated relationship was written across every line of the Queen's provision, but the constitutional dimension carried equal weight and complexity. As king, Charles's decisions about this matter would send signals that extended far beyond family dynamics. Whatever choice he made would be interpreted and analysed for what it said about his reign, his priorities, and his vision for the monarchy's future direction. His relationship with Harry had deteriorated significantly in the years since the move to California. The public accusations made in interviews, the Netflix documentary series that aired the family's private conflicts for global audiences, and Harry's memoir with its harsh criticisms of Charles as both a father and as a future king had all wounded him deeply. Charles had spent his entire adult life, indeed his entire life from birth, preparing to be king. Part of that preparation involved developing a thick skin for public criticism, learning to accept that his position would always make him a target for commentary and disapproval. But criticism from your own son, broadcast to millions of people around the world, cuts through even the thickest protective layer. The anger Charles felt was genuine and ongoing. It coexisted with the love he still had for Harry in ways that created constant internal tension and emotional conflict. He could remember Harry as a child grieving publicly at his mother's funeral, walking behind Diana's coffin in a display of courage that had moved the nation. He could remember Harry's military service, his genuine connection with veterans, his apparent commitment to using his platform for good causes. But those memories now competed with more recent images. Harry and Meghan sitting with Oprah Winfrey, making allegations about the family. Harry promoted his book with interviews that revealed private conversations and characterized his father in unflattering terms. The two versions of his son seemed almost irreconcilable. William's reaction would also matter significantly to any decision Charles made. The Prince of Wales had been even more unforgiving than his father regarding Harry's departure and subsequent public statements. The relationship between the two brothers, once remarkably close and supportive, had fractured in ways that seemed almost beyond repair. William viewed Harry's actions not just as personal betrayals, but as institutional ones, as attacks on the monarchy itself and everything it represented. He had advised his father on multiple occasions to take a firm line, to make clear that there were consequences for Harry's choices and that the family could not simply pretend everything was fine. Charles arranged a private meeting with William for the following day. He knew the conversation would be difficult, but it was necessary. William had a right to know about the Queen's hidden provision before any decisions were made about how to proceed. Beyond the moral obligation to inform his heir, Charles also needed William's support, or at least his understanding. If the King and the Prince of Wales were publicly at odds over how to handle Harry, it would create exactly the kind of family drama that weakened the institution and provided endless fodder for tabloid coverage and public speculation. The meeting took place in Charles's private sitting room at Clarence House. William arrived alone, having sensed from his father's tone during the invitation that this was a serious matter requiring privacy. When Charles explained what had been discovered in the Queen's estate documents, William's face darkened visibly. He listened without interrupting as his father detailed the inheritance amount, the conditions attached, and the personal letter their grandmother had written. When Charles finished his explanation, William's response was immediate and sharp in tone. According to sources familiar with the conversation, William felt that their grandmother had overstepped appropriate boundaries. He argued that she had no right to bind the family to conditions that would essentially require reconciliation with someone who had repeatedly attacked them in public forums. The money itself was one thing, William reportedly said, but requiring Harry to spend significant time in the United Kingdom and giving both Harry and his father oversight of how Harry's children were raised felt like manipulation from beyond the grave. It put Charles in an impossible position and created obligations that William believed were unfair given Harry's behaviour. Charles let his son express his anger and frustration fully. He understood where it came from and even shared some of those feelings himself. The sense of being cornered by circumstances, of having his mother effectively making decisions for him after her death, was uncomfortable and complicated. But Charles also knew his mother well enough to understand her motivations on a deeper level. She had not been trying to manipulate or control. She had been trying to heal, to create one last opportunity for the family to come back together before the divisions became permanent and irreversible. The conversation between father and son lasted over an hour, ranging across multiple aspects of the situation. No consensus was reached by the end of it. William made his position absolutely clear. If Charles chose to honour this provision fully, to reach out to Harry and offer him this inheritance with all its attached conditions, then William would not actively stand in the way. He would not create a public conflict with his father over the decision. but neither would he participate in any reconciliation efforts. He would not pretend that Harry's return to spending significant time in the United Kingdom was something he welcomed or supported. William stated that he would be civil if circumstances required interaction, but he would not go beyond basic courtesy. The wounds were too deep, he explained, and the trust had been too thoroughly broken. Charles could play the role of forgiving father if he wished. William would remain the protective older brother, who had not forgotten the pain Harry had caused to Catherine and to their children, who had been forced to hear their uncle make public statements that reflected poorly on their family. Beyond the immediate family dynamics, Charles also had to consider the broader implications for the monarchy as an institution. Public opinion regarding Harry and Meghan was sharply divided, both in Britain and internationally. Some people saw Harry as a victim of an outdated and rigid institution, a man who had chosen personal happiness and mental health over duty and tradition. They viewed his departure as brave and his criticisms as necessary truth-telling. Others saw him as spoiled and ungrateful, someone willing to exploit his royal connections for commercial gain while simultaneously attacking the family that had provided him with every advantage in life. How the public would react to news of a substantial inheritance with conditions designed to bring Harry back into regular contact with Britain was genuinely unpredictable. It could be interpreted as compassionate and family-oriented, showing that the monarchy valued personal relationships over institutional pride. Or it could be seen as weakness, as the royal family allowing itself to be held hostage by someone who had already taken so much and given so little in return. The optics could go either way depending on how the situation was presented and perceived. Charles's circle of advisors found themselves split on the question of how to proceed. The older generation, those who had served Queen Elizabeth for many years and understood her values and priorities, tended to counsel honouring her wishes fully and immediately. They spoke in terms of duty, of respecting the deceased, of the fundamental importance of family unity to the health of the institution. To them, the question was relatively simple. The Queen had made her wishes clear in a legally binding document. Those wishes should be carried out. The younger advisors, those who thought more in terms of public relations and the challenges facing a modern monarchy, were considerably more cautious. They worried about precedents being set, about appearing to reward behaviour that had damaged the institution. They worried about the optics of Charles seeming to be controlled by his mother's will even after her death, unable to make independent decisions as king. They suggested that perhaps there were ways to honour the spirit of the Queen's wishes while modifying some of the specific conditions to make them more workable or less controversial. In the quiet hours late that night, long after his advisors had departed and the palace had settled into silence, Charles sat alone in his study. He thought about his mother, about the countless times throughout his life that she had guided him, advised him, and sometimes overruled his preferences. She had been the one constant in his existence, the North Star by which he had navigated decades of waiting and preparing for the role he now held. She had not been perfect, and she had made mistakes in both her public duties and her private relationships. But her love for her family had never been in question, and her dedication to the monarchy as an institution had been absolute and unwavering. This clause was her final piece of guidance, her last bit of advice delivered from beyond death. Could he simply ignore it? More importantly, should he? The dilemma Charles faced was ultimately about what kind of king he wanted to be and what kind of father he wanted to be remembered as, and whether those two identities could successfully coexist in this particular moment. His mother had tried to give him a path forward, a framework for potentially healing the family breach. But walking that path would require immense courage, a capacity for forgiveness that might not come naturally, and a willingness to risk further. Pain if Harry rejected the olive branch or accepted it, but then failed to live up to the conditions attached. 3,000 miles away in Montecito, California, Prince Harry had absolutely no idea that his grandmother's will contained a provision specifically designed with him in mind, or that his father had just discovered it and was wrestling with monumental questions about what to do next. Harry's life in California had settled into patterns that were both dramatically different from his previous royal existence, and in some ways surprisingly similar in their demands and pressures. The Netflix projects required planning and production work, the speaking engagements demanded preparation and travel, the charitable initiatives needed ongoing attention and funding. All of this required a level of public performance and personal discipline that was not entirely different from royal duties, just with different masters and different protocols governing the work. Financially, Harry and Meghan were secure but not as wealthy as many people assumed. The deals with Netflix and Spotify had provided substantial sums of money, but maintaining their lifestyle, covering extensive security costs, and funding their various charitable and business initiatives required ongoing income generation. Harry had been born into wealth and privilege, but he had not inherited the kind of generational fortune that would allow him to simply live off investment returns indefinitely. He needed to continue working to generate revenue, which meant navigating the complex and sometimes uncomfortable relationship between his royal past and his commercial present. The relationship between Harry and his father remained strained and distant. They had spoken occasionally over the past few years, brief conversations usually centered on logistics regarding the children or unavoidable family events. Harry had attended his father's coronation on May 2023, but the visit had been notably brief and interactions minimal. When news of Charles's cancer diagnosis became public and earlier in 2024, Harry reached out to offer support, but the response had been polite rather than warm. The wall between them seemed to grow higher with each passing month. If and when Harry learned about his grandmother's provision, his reaction would likely be complex. The substantial sum would provide genuine security and opportunities for his family. £20 million would allow him to pursue charitable work without constant pressure to generate income through commercial deals. But the conditions attached would create immediate complications. Spending 90 days per year in the United Kingdom or Commonwealth countries was not a minor commitment. It meant 3 months annually away from the home he and Meghan had built in California, or bringing his family back to the environment they had left because of its perceived toxicity. Meghan's willingness to return regularly to Britain was questionable. She had made clear in interviews that she felt unsafe there, that the racism and harassment she experienced had been genuinely traumatic. Asking her to agree to regular returns would test their marriage in ways Harry might not be willing to risk. The partnership he had built with Meghan was central to his new life and identity. The provision regarding his children would likely be even more sensitive. Harry and Meghan had been fiercely protective of Archie and Lilibet, keeping them largely out of the public eye and raising them with American values. The idea of trustees approved by King Charles having oversight of funds for their education would almost certainly feel like an intrusion, a mechanism for the palace to maintain control even across an ocean. Yet Harry might also see in his grandmother's provisions something he had been searching for, evidence that he had not been completely cut off, that family members still wanted connection rather than permanent estrangement. His relationship with Queen Elizabeth had remained special even through the worst conflicts. Learning that she had spent her final months thinking about him, trying to engineer a way back, might pierce through the defensive armor he had built up over years of public battle. After deliberation, Charles's advisors recommended a hybrid approach. A formal legal notification would be sent through proper channels, informing Harry of the inheritance, its conditions, and the claiming process. Simultaneously, Charles would write a personal letter, brief and measured, acknowledging the discovery and expressing his intention to honor his mother's wishes. The letter would not plead but would open a door for conversation if Harry chose to walk through it. The timeline would be important. The documents would specify a period, likely 90 days, for Harry to accept or reject the terms. Acceptance would trigger complex steps requiring trustees, compliance frameworks, and mechanisms for the children's funds. All would require sustained communication between Harry's representatives and palace officials. Outright rejection would be simpler legally, but complicated publicly. Harry would be portrayed as either admirably principled or stunningly ungrateful. The most likely scenario might be negotiation. Harry's lawyers would probably seek modifications, arguing certain requirements were too restrictive. Perhaps 90 days could become 60, or the trustee arrangement could give Harry more control while maintaining palace oversight. For Charles, managing these negotiations would test his judgment. How much would he bend to accommodate Harry's concerns? How much would he insist on honoring his mother's precise wishes? Finding balance would require understanding his son, knowing what might bring him closer versus pushing him further away. The hidden clause had emerged from secrecy into complicated reality, offering both burden and opportunity for the future of the monarchy itself.